what, like, had you always wanted to be an astronaut as a child, or was there one moment in your childhood that you knew you wanted to be an astronaut?
You know, I think I grew up loving space and flying in airplanes. The first book that I ever read was about Apollo. I can remember in kindergarten reading this little, kid's book about the astronauts going to the moon. So it was something that I grew up with. As a kid, my bedroom wall was full of pictures of the original F-16, that red, white, and blue YF-16, and planets and stars, and so it was just something that I've always been interested in.
So when did you realize in your career that it was actually going to be an opportunity or an option for you?
So I always thought I'd like to be an astronaut, but that's kind of a crazy dream. I mean, nobody actually gets to do that. So I decided that things like having a technical education and being a pilot would be good things. I ended up going to the Air Force Academy and majored in applied math. And so I kind of went through my career checking boxes that I assumed would be important to be an astronaut, not actually thinking that it would ever happen to me, but I figured I'd at least check the box and keep the options open. You know, I didn't want to burn any bridges. And then there came a point after flying F-16s operationally for 3 or 4 bases. I was either going to try and pursue an operational career and go in that path, or go to test pilot school, which was really the box to check to be an astronaut. And so when I was at Spangdahlem in Germany, there was one day where I said, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try and be a test pilot and try and be an astronaut. So my whole life, I kept the doors open. And then there was that moment in Germany at Spangdahlem Air Force Base when I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do.
So what does the process look like for actually applying for the astronaut program? What all does it entail?
Very long and a lot of paperwork. Now it's mostly electronic paperwork, but we just had a call for a new astronaut class of 2017, and I'm actually going to be on the Air Force board sorting through the Air Force applicants next month, starting next month. So there's the initial phase of filling out lots and lots and lots of forms online. Then we go through an initial vetting process to see who's qualified, and then we decide who's highly qualified, and then we contact references, your boss and people you list as references. And after we go through all these different steps, we'll call down about 100 people for interviews, and that has turned into a 2-week, so you go down there for 1 week of mostly medical interviews, but there's a few testing activities that they do robotics with, and spacewalking, aptitude kind of tests, and personal interviews to get to know the people. And then that group gets whittled down, and then after that second week we make the final call. The last class was 8 people, so it's not a lot of people that get picked. And this class of 2017 had over 18,000 applicants. It's by far the biggest pool of applicants that we've ever had.
So going off of that, what do you think there's a reason for this huge spike in astronaut applicants right now?
I think people are always interested in space. I go around the world, I talk to folks all around the planet, and people think space is cool. It is cool. And so I think the interest in space is there. I think, to be honest, because of social media and NASA's use of Twitter and Instagram and other YouTube and other outlets, I think a lot more people were aware of this class, and I think that's at least part of why the spike was so high in the number of people that applied.
So what does a typical day in space look like? Obviously there's movie depictions of it, but
Right.
What is it a Tuesday in
Right.
space?
It's usually not like that movie Gravity in space, thankfully. But the great thing about being an astronaut is there's no typical day. Of course, every day has some stuff in common. So you wake up, we have a meeting with the ground where we call Houston and Munich and Moscow, the different control centers around the world, and talk to them about what's going on for the day. Then the work gets started, and part of that work every day includes exercise. So we have what's basically a weightlifting machine and a treadmill and a bike are our 3 exercise machines. And then beyond that, some days we do maintenance, stuff breaks that you have to fix. Some days we do upgrades, new equipment comes out and we replace the old with the new. Most days we do some type of science experiment. Some days cargo ships fly to the station, and so we have to grab them and attach them to the station and then unload the cargo, fill up the ships with the old stuff that we had on the station. Some days we do spacewalks. I had a chance to do 3 spacewalks while I was there. So there's a lot of different stuff. Some days you do PAO interviews. Actually, I did one with the Air Force when I was there, so every day is a little bit different.
Okay. So you mentioned gravity. So space debris is kind of a big mission big mission for the Air Force Base Command. So did you have instances where you would get notifications that had to do with a space debris that you had to maneuver? And if so, what does that response look like when you receive a notification?
We do. We get a notification probably every few weeks. Our Chinese friends exploded a satellite a few years ago, and the debris from that is still right in the space station's orbit. And so one of the many reasons why I love Air Force Space Command is that you guys track that debris and can warn us when it's a threat. During my mission, we had several times where we had to maneuver. And most of the time, the ground will call us and say, hey, we're tracking this piece of debris. The time of closest approach is in 8 hours. We'll let you know. Most of the time, it gets cleared and it's not a problem. But every once in a while, it goes from green to yellow to red. And we either have to maneuver if we can, or if it's a pop-up piece of debris that we just catch, what we'll do is we'll run down to the Soyuz, which is our escape vehicle, close the hatches and wait. Hopefully we don't hear any noise, any bangs. And then once it's passed, we open the hatches up and go back in the station. So thankfully, we have had no significant debris hit the station. We've had lots of little debris hit the station. During my spacewalks, I could see lots of little pits and chips. It's kind of like having a car here in Colorado Springs. The thunderstorm comes along and hail hits it, and little dents and dings like that you can see from maybe pieces of paint from a satellite booster, or dust coming in from who knows where in the solar system. But the large objects, Space Command has been able to track and warn us about.
So how does maneuvering work exactly? Is it like someone actually pilots or is there a mechanism?
So we have some pre-planned burns programmed into the computer, 1 meter per second, half meter per second, in different directions. And so the ground team looks at the debris coming from this direction. We need to climb or dive, depending on how to avoid it. And we maneuver the station using actually Russian engines. On the Russian side of the station is where the thrusters are. And so they'll activate this pre-planned half meter per second burn in advance based on the orbital mechanics that we derive from the Air Force radars that we have around the world.
So I know you've served 2 different roles on the 2 different expeditions. So can you just kind of lay out your role on each and how they were different and what distinguished them?
So my 2 space missions were first on the Space Shuttle as a pilot, and that mission was like a TDY to space. It was 2 weeks. It was an assembly flight. It was extremely busy. We landed, and our whole mission for 2 weeks was blocked into 5-minute chunks. Every 5 minutes was scheduled for 2 weeks. When I landed from that, I was completely exhausted, and it was an amazing experience. We were the first and only shuttle that brought up 2 modules on the same flight. So we installed these modules using the robotic arm, did spacewalks to get all the wiring and connectors plugged in. That was my Space Shuttle flight. A lot of the Space Shuttle flight was about the launch and landing and rendezvous and actually flying the vehicle. My station flight was a 200-day flight. At the time, it was the 2nd longest American flight ever. And that launch and landing on a Soyuz out of Kazakhstan, Baikonur, was important and a big part of our training, but that was only 6 hours of my 6-month-plus mission. So the vast majority of that was more like a PCS rather than a TDY. So we lived in space. On the shuttle, I still had a learning curve of how to float, how to maneuver, how to do stuff. On the space station, that after a couple months, I was as good as I was ever going to get it. Just moving is a skill that takes time to learn how to do. So that was a different experience.
So what was the biggest challenge? You mentioned that moving in general is challenging, but is there one thing that was the hardest thing to adjust to?
I think one of the things is pacing yourself. They used to say that shuttle flights were sprints and station flights were marathons. But the reality is the station flight is just a really long sprint because it's pretty busy too. Not at the same pace, but it's a busy time. So you have to be able to manage you have to take care of yourself. Just like on Earth, you got to take care of yourself before you can help others. And same thing in space, you have to learn how to manage your time. We had 3 vehicles actually exploded during my mission. A SpaceX, Orbital Cygnus, and a Russian Progress all had failures in an 8-month time frame. So when we were there, the Progress blew up, which shares the same booster as our Soyuz. So we went this time, we weren't sure if there was a common failure, and we delayed the follow-on crew, so we got extended by a month. And as anybody knows, if you're on a deployment, as long as you know what the last day is, that makes it doable, and once the last day starts changing, then that can be, our crew handled it great. Everybody had a great attitude and stuff, but I guess that was a challenge to have to deal through the unexpected extension of a deployment is basically what we had.
So just kind of a random question, but what was the best space meal? I don't know if meals.
The best space meal?
Yeah. Was it like a favorite one
Beef
that when
brisket.
you got it you were excited?
Beef brisket. The brownies were good because we hardly had any brownies. There's like, we'd have this big bag of desserts and there'd be like 1 or 2 brownies in there. There's a funny picture of me and Scott Kelly, who comes back next week. He came to space when I was there on Expedition 43, so I started out his year-long mission, and that's ending next week. But we both like the brownies, and there's a funny picture. There's a brownie, we cut it in half, and we're each holding half a brownie because that's all we had in our, week and a half supply of desserts. So, but the beef brisket was pretty good.
And just another, so obviously I'm sure there were a lot of moments in space that were memorable or noteworthy, but was there one moment that was just kind of awe-inspiring, or just that moment of, wow, I'm actually up here and this is really happening?
There's so many. It's hard to pick one. I can remember one time I was in the cupola, which is one of the modules I got to install on my shuttle flight. It's a 7-windowed bay. It's like one of those science fiction movies where guys are looking out into space. That's what it is. It's amazing. And we were going over the southern part of the Earth, and the northern lights, the northern aurora, are really beautiful, but they're in the distance, just the way the magnetic pole and the station orbit is. The northern lights are always in the distance. And the way the southern pole, the south magnetic pole is, we fly right over it. And this one time I went down there and we were flying through an aurora. So there was this green dancing radiation surrounding us. And I remember going, hey guys, look at this. And everybody came down and like, oh my, I can't believe that. So that was pretty cool. There was a few moments like that. It was not earthly. It was not of this world, so.
So as I was walking out of my office, someone was Googling you, and they were, they noticed that you took pictures of all the MLB stadiums from
I
space.
did, yeah.
So they were wondering what kind of drove you to do that.
I'm a baseball guy. I love baseball, and it was, growing up, it was my favorite sport, and I've just always been a big fan. And I thought, I don't know what drove it, but I thought it would be a neat way to connect with people on Earth and promote space. And I don't. I should. But we did. A lot of the MLB teams picked them up. Like the Indians, or I'm an Orioles fan from Baltimore, or Astros now. I'm a transplanted Houston fan. Or the coasts were really easy to see. I got an amazing picture of San Diego. You can, see if the outfield is shifted for the left-handed hitter or whatever. It's amazing. Like Kansas City, Pittsburgh, those central stadiums with not really anything nearby, like a mountain range or a lake or something, those were hard to find from space because we're flying 5 miles a second, so you just have like a few seconds to see it, and those were hard to find.
That's awesome. So what is it like talking to your family and stuff up in space? Like how often do you get to talk to them, and what? There
is a IP phone similar to Vonage, where you use computers to talk, and we have that available much of the day, not whenever there's satellite coverage, so it's not continuous, but we have that often available. It's kind of the world's best telephone because you can call anywhere in the world for free and nobody can call you. So it's like it's the telephone that you want. And then NASA set up a video teleconference similar to FaceTime or Skype once a week, so we would get those once a week.
So kind of getting back to like mission-centric questions, but how do you think your career in the Air Force prepared you for that transition into NASA and through the training program and eventually commanding the ISS? Yeah,
my career in the Air Force is what made me being an astronaut possible. The leadership experience that I had I not had the Air Force, I never would have been a leader. And the flying experience is so important. Aviation is the best analog to spaceflight that we have here on Earth. And You have to stay ahead of the jet, and you have to think ahead. And when you're flying, it's a real environment. Like, it's not a simulator. If you make a wrong decision, you might die. And so that sense of urgency is very important for spaceflight. The technical things that I learned were very important. Being a fighter pilot, but also being a test pilot, I think was also important, because in the test community you deal with civilians and contractors, and you expand beyond just other Air Force people. And that's certainly the way NASA is. I mean, there's all different types of civilians and international partners at NASA. So the ability to work with different types of folks from all around the world was another very important thing. I did an exchange with the French Air Force Academy and was assigned overseas several times. And of course, we were the International Space Station, so working in other languages and with other cultures is really important for what NASA does. So that was another one of many things that my Air Force career helped me out with.
So you kind of touched on this, but obviously NASA is a very diverse team. What would you say are like the strengths in their team building that really makes it work? Like, what did they do to help people work well together and be a stronger team? Like, what was kind of the strongest thing you saw team-wise? So
one of the great exercises or training events that we do at NASA for astronauts is a thing called NOLS. It's an organization that does outdoor survival training, sort of. And I got a chance to do this with my crew in Alaska, where we went kayaking in Prince William Sound for 10 days. And you are out in the woods by yourself. You know, you bring some flour and some butter, and I mean, everything is just what you have. And it was a great way to build a team. And we had Japanese and European and American, civilian and military, so it was a great, diverse team. It's a great way to get to know each other, kind of like in the Air Force. When you go TDY, that's when you get to know your squadron mates, but also to learn some good, what we call expeditionary behavior, just good ways to handle yourself and to deal with other people. You know, I'm a technical guy, I'm a fighter pilot, but the soft side of things, the interpersonal skills, is pretty important. If you're going to live, it's important just working in an office job like you're on Earth, but if you're going to live with somebody in the same tube for 200 days, as you can imagine, it's really important. So while you're in space, what was the one thing that you missed that you might not have thought you would miss? What was that thing that I didn't think I would miss? Right. Just that one thing that you were really gunning for, I guess. Smells and sounds of Earth. One day, I had been there for a long time, and Misha Kornienko, Scott's crewmate on the one-year mission, a Russian cosmonaut, was working out, and I floated by and I heard this bird chirping. I stopped and I looked in there. I'm like, where's there a bird? And he had like nature sounds on the laptop. He was just playing birds that the Russian psychologist had sent him all these MP3 files. And it was so cool to hear that. And it had been 72 degrees and dry for 100 days. And it's a very sterile environment. It's very pleasant, but it's sterile. Yeah, I've never thought about that. So they sent some rain music. So I spent a couple months at night. We had little headsets, and I put them on and would listen to the sound of rain. You go to just like at night, and on Earth, it's nice to lay in bed and you hear rain on the roof. That was really nice. And one weekend we actually put rain on all the laptops around the station. So wherever you went, it was raining. It was kind of cool. And then by the end of the weekend, we're like, all right, that's enough rain, and we turned all the rain off, because just like on Earth, a little bit's nice, and then after a few days, that's enough. So on a similar note, what was the first thing you did when you got back to Earth? What was? The first thing I did was a bunch of medical tests, and yeah. First thing you did by choice. For fun, I went car shopping with my son, who had turned 16 while I was in space. So the day I landed, I got on a NASA jet and flew back to Houston. And then the next day, my son was like, all right, Dad, it's time. So we went out, and he drove while I was a passenger. I was not in driving condition for a few days anyway. And so went and looked at cars with him. So do you have one kind of piece of advice that you tend to give, maybe like children or people earlier in their career who have aspirations of becoming an astronaut? Right. So I get asked that all the time. What do I need to do to become an astronaut? And there's a thought that, well, I need to be a test pilot, and I need to scuba dive, and I need to get a pilot's license, or there's these things that, and those are all great things if you love them. more importantly is that you do what you love, because has gifts, everybody's been made with different talents and abilities. And so if you do what you love and what you're good at, you'll do well at it. And if you just do something because you think you need to do it, you're probably not going to get A pluses or DG or whatever it is you're trying to do it. So the advice I give is do what you love, check the boxes, and don't let anybody tell you no. When I applied, I was the youngest pilot at NASA probably for the last 20 years or longer. Everybody told me you're not going to get picked. There's a lot smarter guys, there's a lot better looking guys, there's a lot of guys with a lot more experience than you. And they were true. I applied when I was still in test pilot school. But I was like, you're probably right, but I'm going to fill out my application and I'll let NASA tell me no. And I got lucky and I got picked. So don't, if you want to do something, fill out your application and send it. If you want to go to Harvard, apply. The worst they're going to do is tell you no, and be ready for no, because you very well might hear it a bunch of times, but you might not. So don't limit yourself.